Hey everyone, Set here. Today I'm showing off how I paint skin using a medium effort technique. I've got this spare D&D vampire miniature, and this technique is what I use most for exposed skin in a way that makes it look better on the table than just a simple layer of contrast paint or a flesh tone with some wash over it. But it still isn't a super time consuming technique. It doesn't require a really high level of skill. There is some blending in it, but it's really not very intimidating. I've got the vampire here. I've already primed him off camera. I just use cheap hardware store paint. I'm starting from black and working my way up. First, I'm going to stick him on this plastic bottle cap. I like using bottle caps as painting handles. They're widely available, they're cheap, they're small. When I'm doing a large number of figures, it's very easy to have a large number of bottle caps, and it just helps with my workflow. I use blue tack. Some people like using double-sided tape. I find the blue tack is more reusable. I'm just going to push down very gently but firmly, making sure that I'm not bending or cracking anything. I always make sure that I'm not pushing down on a delicate part of the miniature when I do this. And once he's secure, I'm going to move on to the painting. Let me show you what paints I'll be using. First, I'm going to start with the Vallejo Purple. That's going to be the foundation that's going to go all over the skin. Then I'm going to work up to some GW Cadian Flesh, followed by some GW Kislev Flesh, then Vallejo Ivory, and some pure white just at the very end for the highest highlights. Since this figure is a vampire, his skin's going to be more pale than a normal Caucasian skin tone figure, and that means I'm going to be using more ivory and white towards the end than I would normally use. And it's also the reason I went with purple instead of a chocolate brown or a rust red. Those are great foundations if you have figures that are a little more tan or a little kind of ruddier in complexion. And here's my old-fashioned dollar store dry palette. I do have a wet palette, but I want to show that even with the simplest setup, skin painting is still not that hard. I will say this palette is pretty dirty. It's got a lot of dried over paint on it. After this video, I'm definitely going to be doing a deep clean. To start, I'm going to put a little bit of purple on the palette and then use a medium brush and paint it all over the skin. The first layer is going to have spotty coverage, but that's okay. Once it dries, I'm going to put on a second layer of purple. I am trying to keep the paint off of his clothing, but at this stage, a little spillover isn't a big deal. Alright, I'm going to let this figure sit and dry for a few minutes. Now, I'm going to start tracing out the shapes of the muscles. I'm going to use my old Tesser's brush for it. You can see that this brush has been through a lot. I've been keeping it alive with some brush soap, but even so, you can see the tip is pretty blunted. It works for this application where precision isn't the highest priority. I'm just going to use that and add a small amount of Cadian Flesh to the purple and create this great intermediate tone, and I'm going to use that to trace out the muscle shapes. What's nice is because this has the original purple tone in it, if I make a mistake and I go a little too far, it's very easy to paint back over with the original purple. That said, I do have to keep in mind that this is going on quite a lot brighter than it's going to look when everything's dried. For the moment, I'm just making shapes. I'm not too concerned about blending. I just want to trace out some guidelines for myself for later for the rest of the highlighting. I'm also leaving the fingers alone until I switch to a finer brush. This is a Hero Forge print, which means the muscles are shallower than something like a Warhammer figure. Games Workshop sculpts tend to have more exaggerated muscles that lend themselves to shading a lot more easily. Right now, I've got this intermediate tone done with the initial shapes created as the guidelines. I'm going to add some more Cadian Flesh to the mix, making it almost all Cadian with just a hint of purple, basically flipping it from how it was before. I'm going to thin this a little bit more, and I'm going to go over the already defined areas and really strengthen up that tone. I'm starting on top of the head, since even if this mix is more saturated than I'm expecting, it's okay, because I know that head's going to end up really bright and really pale. You can see how the first intermediate layer has really dulled down as it's dried. On spots like the side of his head where I want to transition to the purple, I'm making sure to keep my mix really watery and sort of pulling it towards the top of the head, leaving just a very fine, almost glaze type layer over the purple, and I'm just going to layer that a few times until I'm happy with it. He's got mutton chops, which means I've got to remember to get some skin tone on his chin. Now I'm going to add some Kislev flesh right into that mix and switch to my newer 00 brush. I don't normally use washes on skin, but if you do, this is about the stage where it would be a good idea to apply a wash. It'll unify the existing colors with that final tint, and you still got highlights to go, so you know that the end result is still going to be nice and bright. Personally, in most cases, I'm just leaving the wash out entirely of the workflow and letting the layering provide the shading. Now I'm adding some of that Vallejo ivory, just a little bit because that ivory is a really big jump from the Kislev in terms of how bright it is. So I'm mixing it in pretty well, making sure to get that existing skin tone in there with that ivory before I apply it. Now I'm adding more ivory, which really brings the mix to almost entirely ivory with just a hint of skin tone. I'm really watering this down and trying to keep it to the areas that would be visible from above. And I'm going to keep working on this, keep blending it. The white goes in at the end, and it's very, very bright, and I'm basically just using this to trace out some of the most highlighted areas and some of the perimeters on these muscles and really making them pop. I often think about an imaginary light source that's pointing down on the miniature, and I use that to think about where the lighting and the shadows should be. I also think about points of interest. That's often the face, or if there's a large and unique weapon, that would be the weapon. Whatever it is, I'll do the shading and the highlighting to really point the viewer at that point of interest, even if, strictly speaking, the highlighting doesn't conform to reality. And the skin is done. This is a fast technique. It doesn't require very much skill, just a little bit of patience. I hope you like it.